sheets of rain slashed the thatched roof of the Bloodletter's hut. Even the baleful dogs baying at the edges of Farmer Cecil's field was forgotten, as the testimony of the dying man absorbed all of Drettel's attention. "I saw him," said the bleeding man. "I saw the thing that dwells in the fort."
You saw what? What did you see?
Asked the magistrate. No one in attendance trusted the man's motives in asking, of course. He was clearly looking for a way to burnish his failing image in the wake of trying times. Still, it was impossible to ignore the significance of this story, and distrust couldn't displace the desperate need for drama. "I saw," said the man. "I saw horns. I saw a bull's head." Two levels down, and already the air felt different, slower, thicker, harder to breathe and less pleasant to smell. He spun around to gain his bearings. Behind him was a discarded pair of gauntlets. Like his hauberk, they were cracked and muddy, but they held together when he picked them up. He slipped them on and found them a good fit. In the small room sat a flat cedar box. It was locked, but our man suspected that the jagged key he'd recovered might just work on it. Inside was a small blue book with thin leather covers and very fine pages, like a Bible. Curious, he picked it up and flipped through it, and felt a peculiar chill stiffen the hairs on his neck. The letters of the book had been unrecognizable, but they entered his mind on sight. He felt a sudden clarity, a strengthening of the mind, and it encouraged him. The mystery of the book had him lost in thought, and he nearly walked straight into the skeleton's shield. With a frustrated sigh, he gathered himself, along with the bronze spear that lay at his feet. In a rotted money belt, he found another iron key with a blade, identical to the one he already carried. He decided there was no need to waste space with a duplicate. As he continued his scrape of this devilish underworld, gathering treasures and supplies as necessary, his doubts occasionally doubled. What was he doing here? Was this really his place? Couldn't the magistrate have done something himself?
Do you swear before God himself that this bull-headed creature is what you saw, sir?
"Yes, my lord," came the reply. "Of course I swear. It was the bull-headed beast, the Minotaur." A hush passed through the assembly. The dying man had invoked the enemy of the people, the Minotaur. Perhaps it was a fable, a fairy tale contrived to frighten errant children who thought to wander too far from the village. Perhaps it was more than that. The notion that it had made its home in the fortress where the war had claimed so many lives was now all too believable. Our man knew he'd need to prepare himself, and the rare healing potion he'd just collected would certainly help. Here was a blessing, a shield of steel, likely dropped after a deadly duel. It was precisely what our man needed in this desperate time. He slid his arm through its leather handles and gauged its weight. He felt confident that he could use his weapons effectively with it strapped to his left forearm. He had the opportunity to prove this before long. The cloaked skeleton had heaved 2 axes at him and produced only a scratch. This shield was indeed a keeper.
Lord save us, the Minotaur.
Could it come to the village itself?
There's nothing for it. We have to get out of here.
Pack up your things. We're evacuating.
All right, that's enough out of all of you. I won't allow such panic, especially over the words of a demented old man who strayed where he didn't belong. I expected better. Now listen, I will gather the council for an emergency meeting, but I can't promise that it will take seriously the fantastic rumors of some mythical monster. Especially not the subject of cautionary kid stories. You are, after all, God-fearing men and women, not children who believe in bounders and boogeymen.
Our man thought the magistrate's remonstrations just as he saw the giant, a hulking being that nested among the bodies of a dozen fallen warriors. In the gloom, he couldn't tell if the thing had seen him, but he supposed that it had heard him, or had maybe even smelled him. He grasped the bronze spear, ran towards his enemy, and heaved it forward, just as he'd done in the war so many years ago. It had worked. The spear had proven mighty enough to bring the giant down in one blow. Our man breathed deeply in relief, though most of what he took in was the dust that flaked from the dead that surrounded him. Dear God. Here stood a gate. He'd heard tell of mysterious doors in the fort, which allowed lateral instantaneous passage between its chambers, but he'd never expected to see one. The gate's color was important. It indicated the effect it would have on a person's physical and spiritual strength upon passing. A green gate would bolster one's muscles at the cost of mental capability, while a blue one would have the opposite effect. This tan one, however, was neutral. It would have no sway on our man's abilities one way or the other. At least, that's what the stories told. He could not be sure until he passed through the gate himself. Its bars glowed invitingly, and though a tiny voice, one resembling the magistrate's, shouted against it, he stepped through it in a state of total faith.